Chapter 13. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, every motel and hotel room in Las Vegas was filled. Thousands of normal, everyday people had converged on the desert town, along with hundreds of wealthy, crap-shooting white men. Frank Sinatra was opening that evening in the gala 12 o'clock show, and when Sinatra opened in Vegas, the high rollers gathered, along with the not-so-high rollers who enjoyed rubbing elbows with the rich. The strip itself was jammed with people as the sun began making its descent in the western sky. The air was dry and hot, and a soft wind blew from the north. In front of Caesar's palace, where huge fountains spurted forth tons of water, thousands of people had gathered. They stood around, dressed in casual polyester and double knits, waiting for a glimpse of the king, or maybe the opportunity of spotting some famous celebrity. As the evening progressed towards midnight, the other casinos and rooms around the strip would gradually empty, the throngs gathering in front of the palace. They all wanted to be where the action was. Kenyatta continued to stare at the happy, thronging people as they drove past. "Man," he began softly, "someday I'd like to come up here, catch a show, bring Betty, shoot a little craps, you know." Elliot Stone did know. They had both resolved themselves to spending the rest of their lives looking in from the outside. Neither man would ever know what the good life was about, what it would be like to live a normal, violence-free life. "Sometimes," Stone said after a long silence, "all this ish, the lights, the beautiful broads, all of it makes you forget where things are really at." Kenyatta nodded. Then he quickly lit a cigarette, and his face became frozen into a mask of determination and purpose. Stone drove down to the hacienda at the far end of the strip, turned around and headed back toward the downtown area and the motel. They would take in a good dinner, but no drinking and no heavy foods, just a steak and a salad. After that, they would shower and shave. Then, like the toreadors of Spain, they would dress themselves carefully and purposefully. Every move, every normal activity from that moment on will be concentrated upon and done with incredible directness. No man really knew whether or not this would be his last day on earth. At 11 o'clock that night, Stonewall began making the rounds of the various hotels and casinos on the strip. Each group of men was gathered together and put into one of the 8 cars that had come up to Las Vegas. Within 20 minutes, Kenyatta's massive gang was assembled and ready to go. At the Palms Motel, Kenyatta united Wilbur Seamus and allowed the former pusher to change his clothes. The slim black man trembled as he donned a tight-fitting turtleneck and mohair slacks. Kenyatta and Stone, along with Rufus and Edgar, waited for the man until he finished. Finally, Seamus looked a little more like his old self, dapper, mean, and ready to deal. "Everyone check their arms?" Kenyatta asked. "We got it all, Kenyatta," Stone replied, flashing the huge .45 he carried. "Okay, gentlemen," Kenyatta said, leading the way out the door. "We got ourselves some work to do." Kenyatta, Stone, and Seamus climbed into the Cadillac. In the trunk was an empty suitcase supposedly filled with the heroin, but the white powder was still sealed tightly in the lining of the roof. Kenyatta was taking no chances. Even if he lost, he would make sure the smack would never reach the wrong hands. Elliot Stone turned on Las Vegas Boulevard and headed toward downtown. As they passed through the garishly lit center, Rufus and Edgar joined them in the rear, driving the Chevrolet. The strip was virtually empty. It was 15 minutes to 12, and far up the street in front of Caesar's palace, Kenyatta and Stone could see the milling throng. Man, Kenyatta exclaimed. We sure picked a righteous hour. Stone laughed nervously. The tension was building to a peak inside him. Just keep those people away from here, and we'll be all right. The Sands was quiet, as were the rest of the hotels on the strip. Stone pulled into the lot in front and parked the car in the self-serve area. Quickly, he and Kenyatta jumped out, then waited for Seamus. One wrong blink of your eye, Seamus, Kenyatta threatened coldly, and I'm gonna blow your motherfucking head off. There was no need to threaten the black man. His nerves had been shattered for some time. Nothing was going to make him take a chance now. Slowly, the three men walked the entrance of the hotel. Kenyatta carried the suitcase and kept his other hand ready to go inside his coat for his .38. At that moment, in the rear of the hotel, 4 cars slowly cruised the parking lot. One stopped in a space near the service entrance, while another pulled in next to the loading dock. The other 2 pulled into customer slots. 4 men climbed out of each car. Some of them walked stiffly as though limping. Sawed-off shotguns were held firmly beneath their jackets. At the other end of the building, near the pool area, these men scampered across the small putting green and toward the patio. They leapt the small fence outside and made their way toward the service elevators. As each man had been picked up along the route, Stonewall had explained quickly the general layout of the hotel. The only routes up to the penthouse would be through the service elevators and the kitchen elevator. According to the diagram drawn up by Roscoe Baker, the men would have to enter the building through the side and the rear, somehow make their way to the elevator and get to the top. The rest would be up to them. Kenyatta, Stone, and Seamus walked quickly through the lobby toward the main elevator. Inside, Kenyatta pushed a button for the penthouse. Before the doors closed, a voice came over the intercom inside the cubicle asking who was calling. Seamus, Kenyatta replied, then added, and friends. Okay, the voice replied. Come on up. The doors closed, and the elevator began its ascent to the penthouse suite. Clement Jenkins stood with his back to the door, staring out of the skyline of Las Vegas. Oscar Manning sat on the couch, nervously puffing on a cigarette. 2 other men, both white, stood at attention on either side of the large plush penthouse. The elevator arrived at the top floor, and Kenyatta and Stone were greeted by a tall, broad-shouldered white man in a neat business suit. He looked at both men, then down at Seamus. You'll see now, the white man said. Kenyatta nodded, then gave Seamus a slight nudge and pushed him out into the red velvet hallway. Stone followed immediately behind as the white man led the way to the gold-plated door at the end of the hall. As he approached the door, Kenyatta turned quickly and glanced down toward the other end. There, the service elevator's doors remained shut. He prayed silently that his men were inside and on their way. He would not have much time with the man inside the penthouse. The white man opened the doors to Jenkins's suite and ushered Kenyatta and Stone inside. Seamus followed a few steps behind the 2 men. Clement Jenkins turned from the window and stared at Stone and Kenyatta with cold blue eyes. His mouth was set in a frown, and the maroon dinner jacket he wore did not add much to change the sour aura. Welcome to Las Vegas, gentlemen, he said coldly. Pleasure's mine, sir, Kenyatta replied quickly. His first look at this man, who caused so much death and heartbreak, did not jive with his hatred. The man thought Kenyatta was nothing more than a weak white man. A white who had the benefit of the best education, the most money, and all the opportunities. All he had done was live his life as it had been set for him to walk through it. Kenyatta continued to stare at the slim, feeble-looking Jenkins, then suddenly understood why he disliked the man. Jenkins smelled of death. There was nothing about him that suggested he had ever lived or that he had any intentions of living. The man thought Kenyatta was a death dealer.
"Let's get on with it,"
Jenkins said after Stone and Kenyatta sat down on the plush couch.
"You know I've missed Frank's opening because of this?"
Kenyatta nodded. "Yeah, well, we're really sorry about that." Stone sat on the edge of the couch waiting. He knew that Kenyatta would have to make the first move and that everyone was waiting for the first sound of gunfire. After that, he knew that all hell would break loose. Kenyatta leaned back on the couch and lit a cigarette. He looked directly at Clement Jenkins and smiled. "Your man out there in the desert, mister, offered 7.5. Well, the price gonna go up a little bit. All this traveling is shit." Jenkins strode across the room and took a seat behind his huge oak desk. Obviously, the mammoth thing gave him a sense of power.
"All right, what's the price?"
"One flat, mister. $1 million in cold, hard cash." There was a silence in the room. Jenkins looked first to Manning, then to Seamus. Both men looked away. Finally, he turned back to Kenyatta.
"You f***ing little you come waltzing in here and demand a price like that? I'm surprised your weak little mind can't even conceive of such a high number."
Kenyatta felt his blood boiling. "You mean you won't take it for that price?" he said.
"You what kind of fool do you think I am, boy?"
For the first time in his life, Kenyatta knew that he had underestimated his man.